Alright, in this video we're going to look at performing operations with radical expressions, and we'll break this objective up into a couple videos for time purposes. So once we've simplified the radicals and all radical expressions, we can then add and subtract radical expressions that have the same radicands and the same roots. So for instance, if we have the cube root of x plus another cube root of x, that makes two cube roots of x's. So you can think of like radicands and like roots as combining like terms like you've done in the past. So example 4, simplify each of the following. We want exact answers only. So we have the square root of 98 plus the square root of 8. So using our simplification techniques, the square root of 98 is 7 times the square root of 2. And the square root of 8 is 2 times the square root of 2. So we have 7 square root of 2 plus 2 times the square root of 2. And these are like roots with the same radicand, so they're both square roots and they both have a 2 as the radicand, so we can combine them together like we'd combine 7x plus 2x to get 9x. It's just in this case it's not going to be 9x, it's going to be 9 times the square root of 2. So the square root of 98 plus the square root of 8 is 9 times the square root of 2. Now, we can check our answer by typing in the square root of 98 plus the square root of 8 in our calculator and then seeing if it gives us the exact same decimal expression as 9 times the square root of 2. If it does, then we've got the answer right. Part B, we have the square root of 108x minus the square root of 300x. So the square root of 108 is 6 times the square root of 3, and then we have 6 times the square root of 3 times the square root of x is 6 times the square root of 3x. The square root of 300 is 10 times the square root of 3, and then we have the x still inside of a square root, so the square root of 300x is 10 times the square root of 3x. So we have 6 times the square root of 3x minus 10 times the square root of 3x. These are like radicands and like roots, so they're essentially like terms. So we can subtract 6 minus 10 gives us negative 4 times square root of 3x. All right, part C, we have 4 times the square root of 6 plus 3 times the square root of 54 plus minus 5 times the square root of 45. Well, square root of 6 we can't really simplify, but the square root of 54 and the square root of 45 we can. So the square root of 54 simplifies as 3 times the square root of 6. So we'll substitute 3 times the square root of 6 in for this square root of 54. And then the square root of 45 is 3 times the square root of 5. So we'll substitute 3 times the square root of 5 in for the square root of 45. So what that's going to give us is 4 times the square root of 6, and then 3 times the square root of 6 for the square root of 54, and then minus 5 times 3 times the square root of 5 for the square root of 45. So we can take 3 times 3 and we can take 5 times 3. We're going to get 4 square root of 6 plus 9 square root of 6. So 3 times 3 is 9 times the square root of 6 gives us 9 square root of 6. And then 5 times 3 times the square root of 5 is 15 times square root of 5. We don't multiply the numbers that are inside the radicals by numbers outside the radicals. This is not 9 times the square root of 18, and this is not 15 times the square root of 25. All right, now we have like radicals here with the 4 square root of 6 plus 9 square root of 6. That gives us 13 square root of 6, and then we'll bring down the minus 15 times the square root of 5. So this big nasty looking expression here for example 4C simplifies to 13 times the square root of 6 minus 15 times the square root of 5. Again, don't forget when you simplify the square root of 54 and the square root of 45, you still have the 3 and you still have the 5 in front that you have to multiply by, so don't forget about those. All right, that about does it for this video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.